Dr. Thomas Armstrong is Executive Director of the American Institute for Learning and Human Development. We sat down to talk about depression, medication, and the power of neurodiversity.
Hi, I'm Dr. Thomas Armstrong, and I'm an author who focuses on learning and human development.
Dr. Armstrong, I know that you suffered with depression as your father suffered with depression.
Right.
What helped you? How have you dealt with your own depression, learned from your father regarding his, and been depression free now for quite some time, almost 2 decades?
Right. Well, my father's depression, unfortunately, was back in the 50s and 60s when they didn't have either the medications or these strategies. I mean, I suffered through five different depressions starting at age 13. And most of them, in fact, all of them were miserable in different ways. But it was while doing psychotherapy that I discovered, through the help of my therapist, some of the elements, the building blocks, so to speak, for creating an environment under which I could thrive. And I was also reading the literature and reading about the work of Dr. Richard Lewontin at Harvard. And he had really pioneered this idea of niche construction, which is building a positive environment. And it came out, it didn't come out of psychology, it came out of developmental biology and evolutionary biology. And it's the idea of what a bird does when it builds a nest, or when a bee builds a hive, or when a spider spins a web. What they're all doing is changing their environment so that it works for what they do best. And I thought, well, let's think about what some of the elements are for building a positive environment for ourselves. And so I got help from my therapist, and we started to put together elements like mindfulness meditation and even my sleep cycle, because I'd been fighting my sleep cycle for so long because I get up late and I go to bed late. And in this culture, you're supposed to feel shame around that. And so it's a tough thing to accept. But once I accepted it, now I get up at noon and I go to bed at 3:30, and it works AM, and it works very well for me. So that was another kind of twig in the nest, so to speak, another way of building my environments. But mindfulness meditation was a total revolution for me in terms of quieting my mind, because one of the things with people with depression is that they ruminate a lot. Although that can be a positive quality, rumination can devolve into reflection, which can devolve into philosophical outlook and so forth. But it can be a real problem if you're undergoing a depression, because the rumination is all about, I didn't do this, and I'm not as good as this person, and this is horrible things going to happen in a year or less. And so getting out of that is really important. So mindfulness meditation allowed me to sit and watch my breath. That's all it is, really. It's sitting and watching your breath. There are other forms of mindfulness as well, but this is the kind I use. And if you get an interruption, like my mind rot that's going on, you just notice it. You just say, oh, I'm ruminating, or oh, I'm creating a negative comparison. And so you just accept it, and then you go back to your breath. So you just get a certain distance from your thoughts, which is really helpful, because the next time you're out of your meditation and you're going through your life and you get a thought saying, this is only going to get worse, your depression, you think, well, that's just a thought. I'm just having a thought, and it's a negative thought. And so I have a distance from it, and I don't get caught in it, and I don't start getting telling stories about it, like, yeah, well, the last time you had a depression, remember how long that lasted, and it was really difficult, and the way things are shaping up, it's not going to be good. You're doing all that, you get hooked by an idea, and then you go down the rabbit hole, so to speak. And so this mindfulness is great for people who do that ruminating, because it gives them distance, and it calms the person. Those are two of the elements that I added to my nest, so to speak, my positive niche. And, it didn't happen immediately, but gradually over time, I got to feeling better and better. The symptoms went down and down. And like you say, it's been 17 years since I've had a relapse. I'd been fighting medication because my dad was medicated. But back in the 50s and 60s, they didn't have good medication. In fact, all that they had was for light problems, they gave you Valium. For heavy duty problems, they gave you um, Thorazine. Finally, I went to Europe to do a workshop and I didn't sleep for 5 days. I mean, I did 1 hour of sleep in that 5 days for a 5 day workshop. And, I survived that, but I thought, yeah, I better take this seriously. So when I got back, I started taking Prozac, and Prozac was great. It worked for me for about 20 years, and then it didn't work. And so then I started to work with my psychiatrist on the right kind of, alternative medications. And so as it is now, I'm taking olanzapine, which is an antipsychotic, believe it or not, that they use for retractable depression. I'm taking Zoloft, Wellbutrin, and I take a little trazodone at night to help me sleep. So I'm really convinced that medication was a major factor in turning my depression around. And for people who have reservations about taking medication, let me tell you, I hear you on that. And I understand your concern about losing touch with your vitality and that kind of thing. But I want you to know that I haven't lost touch with my vitality. In fact, I've found it again. But when it comes to the fact that I'm a writer and I have lots of ideas that I want to get out to the world, functioning is pretty important.
Yeah.
I mean, I had days, I used to write a column for Parenting Magazine. I used to, and I went through a depression then, and I had to drag myself to get 1 or 2 pages done during the day. And then the next day, I couldn't do anything. At least consider working with a psychiatrist on these medications, but work with somebody who is good at it. Um, my psychiatrist went to Princeton and worked under 2 Nobel Prize winners. And even he had a little difficulty and had to refer me out to his mentor to get kind of the final touch, which was the olanzapine. But work with somebody good and make sure that they're monitoring you. I have to meet with my psychiatrist every 3 months. It's worth considering when you consider all the pain that is the alternative. So, I consider that part of my niche construction. 20 years ago, I would have fought tooth and nail against it. And I should mention that, there are other forms of neurodiversity besides depression. There's autism, there's ADHD. And I wrote a couple of books on ADHD. And at the time, I was dead set against Ritalin and Adderall. But then that happened during the time I went to Europe and didn't sleep for 5 days. And when I came back, I thought, well, I'm still editing this book. There's an opportunity to do some editing. And I definitely I said, look, there's some problems with Ritalin, there's some problems with Adderall. But if it helps, if it makes the difference after you've tried other things, and that's the other thing, don't go to these medications right off, which we're kind of primed to do, but try some non-drug alternatives. The book I wrote on ADHD called The Myth of the ADHD Child. Don't be scared by that title. It was just like a critical perspective on ADHD. Most of it is 101 non-drug strategies. And that's what I think in this world where we're awash in medications, we need to think about, either I'm going to try other things, and if that doesn't work, I'll use medication, or I'll take medication and then I'll use these other things so that maybe I don't have to take as high a dose or don't have to rely on it so entirely. So essentially, when I was writing the ADHD book, the 101 strategies were part of the positive niche construction.
It's really great to hear your experience because a lot of us will have the symptoms of depression or be completely depressed, and you get that blanket prescription. It's
Right.
Prozac, it's Zoloft, it's, an Afrinel or whatever it's going to be. And
Right.
each individual has their own unique chemistry, which is why
Right.
I was so excited about your positive niche construction because you're speaking about tools and a lot of us don't want to pick them up. We want it to be instant fix. And
Right.
the medication only gets you to a level playing field where you can actually start to do
Right.
the work. And the work
Exactly.
comes from the inside out, not the outside in. And I
Very
think
good
that's
point.
where a lot of confusion is created. But I'm really happy that you found the delicate blend that works for you, just like you
Yeah.
accepted the fact that you're a night owl. I couldn't operate on that schedule. I'm up at
Right.
4 and I'm getting
Wow.
sleepy by 6:30 p.m., but I couldn't do your wake up at 3 and or noon and stay up till 3 in the morning. So
Right.
it's just
And I couldn't do yours.
accepting, yeah, and it's accepting your unique humanity and me accepting my unique
Hmm.
humanity. And I'm so glad you brought up the tool of mindfulness because it is so extremely powerful. And I feel we've been trained away from anything that even flutters with the feel of mindfulness, with all the
Right.
distractions of the
Right.
systems that we've been immersed in and
Yeah.
marinated in and strained away from that power. So I want you to talk with me a little bit about your neurodiversity book
Hmm.
and what the experience of writing that book, how that's impacted you
Right.
specifically.
Well, I wrote the first edition back in 2010 when I was right in the middle of my last depression. Actually, 2008 is really when it was. And I thought, here I am. I'm feeling depressed. I'm looking at things from a negative point of view, and I'm writing a book about the positive side of neurodiversity. And I'm working on chapter on depression, and I'm trying to write about the good points while I'm suffering deeply the bad points. And so I thought, this is kind of ironic. But then I looked back and I said, well, it's probably was very therapeutic for me because one of the things with depression, that another little trick is to focus on the good things that are happening around you. I did that in my journaling. I would write about the day, and then at the end, I would put, what was your happiest moment of the day? I called them my HMs. And, at the end of a year or so, I'd look through and I look at all these HMs. Wow, that's pretty neat. So, it was really difficult. By the time I got around to the next edition, which was 10 years later, 12 years later, I was working with my therapist and I had already written some few sketchy ideas about positive niche construction, but it was really in that second book that I laid out all of the components and described them and gave samples and examples that people could use. Well, I love to write. I mean, that's another good thing about me that counteracts my depression is I'm passionate about writing. I'm passionate about speaking, as you can probably tell. The typical model of somebody who goes in for therapy is like, I'm not okay. You're going to make me okay. And you work on this kind of dynamic. And so it's like trying to get from here to there, over some kind of unbridgeable divide. Whereas this approach, positive niche construction, is about it's about being who you are right now, everything that you are, and then just enriching who you are more and more and more. So there's no great divide to cross. The medication issue runs into another problem, and that is that, it's mostly the MDs. In fact, it's only the MDs and the psychiatrists who are MDs who prescribe the drugs. And they are coming from a medical model, which is based upon uh, disease. I mean, they've got that whole diagnostic and statistical manual with lists of all the 300 or so odd psychiatric diseases. So, with the disease perspective, it's much harder to see the gifts. of people who are neurodivergent. And that to me was the great revolution of neurodiversity. Um, I was cruising the internet back in about 2006 when I saw this website, neurodiversity.com. And it had pictures of Andy Warhol and Alan Turing and Nikola Tesla and all, you know, people who were you would consider oddballs, but certainly contributed a great deal. And underneath it said honoring the varieties of different wiring. And I went, that's it. That's it. That's what we've got to do. We've got to look at the strengths of people who are labeled with all of these negative labels. And so I spend a lot of time in my book, The Power of Neurodiversity, looking at the positive side of autism, the positive side of ADHD, the positive side of anxiety disorders, the positive side of intellectual disabilities like Down syndrome. Um, because new research has come out over the last 20 or 30 years, and I was delighted to discover it, about all the different strengths associated with these conditions. You look at Albert Einstein, you look at James Watson, who co-discoverer of DNA, and James Joyce, arguably the greatest writer in the English language ever, except for maybe Shakespeare. And each of those individuals had a child with schizophrenia. So they got some of the genes and their kids got all of them. So that's one way of making sense of how something is horrible or is seemingly horrible as schizophrenia could be in any way beneficial to human beings. So there are all these interesting kinds of certainly totally speculative, but intriguing ideas that could explain why, we have these neurodiversities. And in fact, the word neurodiversity to me says so much. The word diversity, it brings up so much of what we have already looked at in terms of natural ecology. We know that diversity is good, uh, despite what some people in a higher office might say. Diversity is a great thing because you have diversity, you've got choices, you've got possibilities. If you only do everybody does the same thing, thinks in the same way. I mean, isn't that what fascism is? And so neurodiversity is a breath of fresh air. It's saying that we need to give the same attention to differences in brains as we give to differences in flowers or differences in animals. We don't say that a calla lily has petal deficit disorder. We accept it for what it is, for its beauty, for its color, for its contribution to the natural world. So I think this field of neurodiversity has a lot to say, that is right in tune with the times. At a time when our planet is dying, we need to have a whole new attitude toward diversity. In a time when fascism reigns in all these different large countries, we need diversity to be able to fight back and change the environment politically. So there's a real need here on a lot of different levels for neurodiversity to flourish.
If I'm understanding correctly and would have to encapsulize what I've heard from you today and what I've experienced in the short time that I've known of your work, I would have to say that you're looking not for homogenized treatment. You're
Right,
looking for the unique individual,
right,
what fits for that individual. You're honoring the individual,
right,
respecting the individual, loving
right.
that individual, and finding balance. Also, taking on responsibility for self, not just handing it
Right,
over to pharmacology and what they say is the benefit and the
right,
path, but you're
right.
suggesting that it be very individual
Yes.
and an exploration and one to honor
Yeah,
because of its beauty.
very much. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better.
Well, this has been really fun. It's been short. If people want to check out your work, Dr. Armstrong, or have a conversation with you, where do they
Hmm.
go?
Well, they can go to my website, Institute, the number four learning. So instituteforlearning.com. And in fact, if you go to my website on my homepage, if you sign up for my newsletter or for my blog posts, rather, you'll get a free copy of a neurodiversity strengths checklist that's in my new book, The Power of Neurodiversity. It's a list of 200 items, and they ask you things. How are you good at this? Do you do this well? So that a person will take this and get a whole cornucopia of positive things that they can learn about themselves. And that's a big part. In fact, that may be the most important part of positive needs construction, becoming aware of what your strengths are. You know, your therapist can help you do that as well. Others in your world can help you do that, but you need to find out for yourself as well.
I'm going to check that out and do it myself. And we'll leave your website in the comments section
Great.
below. I want to thank you for your time, your exploration, your experience, and for sharing so openly today. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Susan. It's wonderful talking with you.